Last talk of the day, so I guess everyone's probably, for you guys anyway, this is early morning here. I'll try to keep this reasonably brief, and you also, I'm in the peril that everyone else talking so far has actually covered a lot of my content, so apologies for the repetition. This is a bit of a grab bag of relatively random stuff associated with Australasian occultations. And I'll just see if I've got this PowerPoint thing working properly. Okay, some history. So most people would know of myself as director for the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand Occultation section, but I just want to point out the path that's led to that organisation existing and where we're looking to go in the future. So this is Graham Blow. Some of you will have known Graham. He initially took an interest in occultation astronomy when he was based in Auckland in New Zealand, and you know, recognizing the very cooperative nature of occultation observations, sought to recruit other observers around the Auckland district to support what he was doing. Graham was very good at that, at the networking. And then when he moved to Wellington, the section, the observing coordination expanded across the whole of New Zealand and became an observing section within the RASNZ. RASNZ is a somewhat unusual sort of an organisation in the sense that there are regional societies and clubs around New Zealand, and then they are affiliated with a national body, which is also New Zealand's professional astronomy body. New Zealand not being a very big place, a very large population, there simply isn't the separation between the professional and amateur community, which leads to, in my opinion, a much more engaged amateur community with science, and there's a lot of New Zealanders that you're really not very sure which side of the amateur professional fence they actually sit on. Within Australia, Australia never really developed a similar occultation coordinating body, and Graham, being the intensive networking person that he was, extended that organisation across Australia as well. Now, we're currently in the exercise of trying to reframe the public perception of the organisation as being New Zealand centric. It's not. I'm not a New Zealander. When Graham passed away, he'd spent some time cultivating me to be his successor, and he certainly didn't have any concerns in it being a trans-Tasman organisation. In a rather awkward sort of a set of conversations, we've sort of rebranding ourselves as the Trans-Tasman Occultation Alliance, trying to use that phraseology whenever we get an opportunity like this to do a presentation. Okay, something else that other people have covered all my content on. Australia and New Zealand, it's a pretty big piece of the earth. The Australian continent's about the same size as the contiguous 50 states of contiguous states of the US, but with nothing like as many people in it. The red circles represent the sort of regions where we've got reasonably large volumes of observations, and this is quite asteroid occultation centric, but lunar occultation isn't all that different. In New Zealand, it's a little ironic in that most of the observers are in the South Island, whereas most of the population is in the north. That's probably a reflection of the weather for the north, whereas the east coast of the South Island is reasonably dry. We've got a core group of observers in that Sydney to Canberra corridor, including Bill Hanna's remotely controlled from Idaho setup at YAS, what I refer to as the YAS Occultation Factory. Churns out enormous numbers of observations. A couple of very keen observers in Melbourne down in the south. You guys can see my mouse when I move it around.
Yes.
And some observers in Adelaide. Up here in the southeast corner of Queensland, we've got John Bradshaw and John Broughton. So John, as Dave's already mentioned, is really Australia's only consistent mobile observer. So if I drew John's circle, it'd probably come about here and go down to about there. He covers a lot of kilometres, and occasionally he's gone a lot further afield. And this is me up here all by myself, up on the tropic. All of this stuff has got basically no people in it, let alone amateur astronomers. And it's been a while, unfortunately, since we've had any observers and any observation reports from the southwest of WA, Western Australia, sorry, and Tasmania, which is a shame because that would increase our coverage. So with those very scattered groups of observers, generally not mobile and rather big gaps in between, occultation observing, asteroidal occultation observing is quite an opportunistic affair. It's what comes to you rather than what you can chase. So yes, I'm putting back some of the stuff that John Moore was sharing for North America. So this is the Australian New Zealand equivalent data, goes back a bit further, and you can see in the observed positive chords space and the positive events that trend that Dave Herrell showed. That's very much a reflection of catalogue and prediction certainty. The one that bothers me a little bit, but at the same time doesn't, is that number of observers and reporters. So it's not a big number, and there's not really a trend there. We've had some big years, 2013, 2014, where we've had large numbers of people, but the truth is there would have been an event in that year that was special. We did a lot of promotion around, and a whole pile of people came out of the woodwork, did one event, and then promptly disappeared again. So in the background, there's this core group of 20 to 30 observers. The names have changed, but we're not a growing organisation. I've got a bit of commentary on that at the end of the presentation. Lots more observations, but not lots more observers. So this is breaking things down on a month-to-month basis. In the Southern Hemisphere, where you get the short, or at least for the high latitude observers, shorter nights in summer, which is December, January, coinciding with that period of the year when the Scorpius Sagittarius star clouds are behind the sun. Get this very, very strong seasonal trend, where the winters, long nights, and good access to those star cloud regions produce a much higher number through the middle of the year. And the trends become much more accentuated now that Gaia has allowed those bigger peaks, bigger volumes of precise predictions through the winter months. Just to point out, January 2020 was the first month, in as far as I can get data for, where we had no positive observations for the whole month. Mostly because, well, up here in the north, we were under the clouds for our wet season, but down south, they were under the smoke from this year's fires, so it made things a bit awkward. Dave had some stats around sort of yield of how many chords per positive event we were seeing, and he had a number up there in the high 2s to 3s. For us, and this is all reports, so this is just positives. This is everything that hits my inbox. The yield number is a good deal lower. People are chasing the events that come close to them, and in all likelihood, there aren't other people doing it because the paths just don't line up. So, and it hasn't really changed. The volumes have gone up, the positives have gone up with it, but the number of people monitoring per event really isn't shifting. You guys have probably seen too many of these sorts of plots already today, so I'll skip through these fairly quickly. Some of the better results that we got last year. This is Dembowska, another John Broughton Roadshow job, and it's actually my first mobile observations for close to 10 years, and it was a good night. Experience shows John's stations all worked except for number 6 there, where something bumped the scope between when he set it up and when it actually observed, and he only caught, I think it was the disappearance, and then it moved out of the field of view. Whereas I actually had 2 additional stations in there, both of which failed for technical reasons, and I'll learn from that for next time. This was a good follow-up to another event that John had observed a few years earlier, where on the same object on Dembowska, and clearly showed then that Dembowska was smaller and brighter, or higher albedo, than had previously been thought. This observation more or less reconfirmed that, which was good. Another John Broughton Roadshow. Put this one in mostly to acknowledge Peter Anderson's input. Peter's probably the last of our visual observers. There were a large number of people who used to contribute observation as visual observers through the 90s and early 2000s who've never made the jump. And it's a bit of a shame because they're still out there. They still come to our TDSO meetings, and I still swap emails with them, but they're not contributing observations. And I guess when we have meetings, all we talk about is video, 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 and they haven't, for whatever reason, financial or technical knowledge, made the transition across. It's to our detriment. But Peter soldiered on, and I think he considered himself very unlucky not to have seen an occultation there. So, as I sort of hinted, we sort of wait for really good events that line up and join some of those red circles on my map. This is a good example. It runs from Western Sydney right through to Melbourne, including most of the Canberra area observers, Bill, Dave, and John Newman. Pretty loose fit, but also some reasonably large uncertainty bounds on that one, and a good one to follow up in future. And this is not the similar arrangement that Sydney to Melbourne corridor, if we can get it to work, can produce some really good results. Okay, this is this is completely taking over Steve Preston's presentation a while back about future events and I'm going to try and put a plug in here for, again, those Georgia and Florida observers. This is coming up 5th of September, so a little over a month away. Steve included in his slide pack an event for a checklist. A checklist is a centaur. It was the very uncertain 11th magnitude event. Centaurs are really special and interesting objects. They're dynamically unstable orbits between Saturn and Jupiter. And so many that have been observed in occultation or by other means show some very interesting behavior. A checklist is also on the list as a periodic comet and has undergone cometary outbursts, which makes occultation observing interesting. The biggest centaur, of course, is Chariclo with its rings, which a number of us have observed in occultation with amateur equipment. This object, 2014 NW65, is estimated to be the second largest centaur and has not been observed in occultation. And you can see that in the fact that the precision of this prediction is awful. Pretty much anywhere in North America, and I'm hoping that we in Australia, despite the twilight and low altitude, can have a go at this one too. Since so many of the centaurs have got rings or debris fields around them, or comas, cometary comas, if we can get a look at this object, there's a good chance that something unusual will be afoot. It's a nice bright star. I think it's 7th magnitude, and a reasonable duration. I can't just see the duration number here. Duration 9 seconds, but it's going to take a lot of effort across a wide space to try and catch this one. I fully expect we'll get to the 6th of September and nobody will have seen it. But if we have seen it, then the science payback is significant. I believe this object is on the recon list. And this is a lucky star prediction, and I'm not sure it's come through any of the Occult Watcher feeds yet. So some closing thoughts. all this preoccupation with asteroidal occultations and monoplanet occultations is all well and good, but I think there's some future stuff out there still in the lunar occultations. I only caught the back end of Dave Dunham's talk, and I'm sure he will have spoken in support of continuing to do lunar occultations. A lot of it, I suspect, will be more centered around star properties. We've done a lot of stuff with double stars. Brian Loader in New Zealand has been acting as the global coordinator for double star observations for some time now. That mantle's been passed to Martin Unwin, who's also down there in the South Island. He's always keen to promote that exploration and ongoing monitoring. If you discover one, that's good, but if we continued monitoring, we'll be able to show orbital motion for those double stars. Then a few of us are mucking around with digital cameras at much higher frame rates, studying what else we can perhaps learn about stars. And I think at the moment we're probably limited by our knowledge of the physics and what's going on there to determine stellar diameters and other parameters for stars. Dave talked about the Gaia effect. I see it as a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of monoplanet occultations. It for us, with the non-mobile observer base, it does dilute our effort. But at the same time, it allows us to develop more certain predictions that cover more of the fixed observers, so that we will get access to more events that cross multiple observing stations, assuming the weather is cooperative. And something else that I'm not aware of, but maybe is happening out there, is as a regional coordinator, and you see the observations come through, there's a few that come through and you go, that's a really interesting object, really should follow up on that. And we are so awash in so many predictions now that a reason to chase a particular object is sometimes needed to do your prioritization. At the moment, it's whatever event comes close to you. But the higher priority objects, things that are unusually shaped, events where we've seen a significant departure from a shape model, is something that's should be a priority. And I'm personally not aware of anyone within our communities who's sort of keeping a bit of a checklist of objects that should be of follow-up value, as separate from spacecraft astrometry objects like Phaethon or the Trojan programs. They're great. They profile those events, but I think we have our own priority events to follow up on. Ditto for stars. I mean, Dave showed his list of double stars there. I've got to admit, I still find it a little awkward to generate predictions searching for a given star, but there are quite a few stars out there now that have had multiple observations, multiple occultations observed for them, and the opportunity to use asteroids to probe specific stars is something that is real and could see more of. And the last dot point I got here is the whole world's got a whole lot more used to doing virtual meetings like this. Our TTSOs have been webcast for quite some time, and this year, of course, we tried to do it in entirety like this. I don't think it worked as well as this does. I think what you've got going here has been really good. But I'm also seeing that in other spaces. Rob Pavinsky, who's actually in the meeting here this morning, tonight, or whatever time zone you're in. Last weekend, he presented to the Astronomical Society of South Australia on monoplanet occultations, and that's to an interested audience of amateur astronomers who perhaps in other times would not have been accessible. And it's certainly something that's an issue for me as someone who's geographically isolated. I'm finding myself now in meetings with amateur astronomers that just would never have happened before, which gives me an opportunity to spruik occultation astronomy. And that's where I'm hoping that I can drag up those numbers of participating observers. And that's about it. I think I still took too long.
Questions for Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that last point you brought up is interesting and important. And I encourage everyone to, troll the Zoom meeting lists, of astronomical clubs around you, and reach out to them. Some of them have focused observing sessions and things where you can, speak at length. You can, really give a good plug for occultations. So although it's sad that we're not having the in-person meetings like we used to, and so forth, we're actually, although maybe not reaching as many people, we're reaching them farther afield, and maybe the ones who are more likely to respond to our outreach efforts. Especially younger people, I think, who are more tech savvy than some of the older people.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Astronomical Association of Queensland, which of course is headquartered in Brisbane, which is 600 kilometres away. And so I'd never actually got to a meeting until last month via Zoom. So yeah, it's just enabled conversations that just weren't happening before, which is really good.
This is Steve Preston. I thought I'd make one comment. On the last couple of years, I've been trying to make a point of when I do my best events of the year list, I've split it into priority events and best events. The priority events are actually kind of based off a list of objects, asteroids, which are interesting from the standpoint of a shape model perspective. I kind of have a list of interesting objects from some of the people doing shape models, and objects which are perhaps known to be binary, and a few other categories. So I'd use that as a guideline to try to flag a few events as being priority because they're potentially better scientific value. The part where I feel that we can improve a little bit there also is to try to make a point of following up on those events in a more timely fashion, a week or two ahead of time, to post something on the list and say, hey, there's this important event we know about, and we want to let everybody know about it in plenty of time so they can get prepared. So that's one area where I think it'll be good for us. That was kind of part of the vision behind having our, at least in the North American realm, is part of the vision behind having our expeditions. One expedition was meant to be prioritizing an event that was about science, gathering good science data and focusing on that. And another one of those expeditions was supposed to be focused on just a good event for everybody to go observe that would be easy to observe and that hopefully a lot of people would have access to. So I think that's another area we can all kind of look at in the future, how to make sure
that's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. And of course, because the opportunities are global, we probably need to get ourselves organized to share that globally.
Right.
I'd like to make a comment about the consequences of DR3. If the asteroid orbits from DR3 have the accuracy that we are hoping for, we will have a huge number of highly accurate predictions. If that occurs, then I think our approach to observing asteroidal occultations will need to change. At the moment, we, particularly for fixed stations, we observe whatever comes near us. And mobile stations, you only go for the exciting events. But I can see in the future a need will develop for us to be selective of the events we're going to try. In other words, look at the list of events and say, for this year, we are going to focus on this group of events. I mean, if there's half a dozen events of a particular asteroid which are suitable, then we'll focus on those rather than just we'll do whatever comes our way. So a change in our approach to what we observe.
Well, at the same time, I don't think we can necessarily guarantee that. I think we should expect that once we have once we have those improved orbits together with the Gaia star position, we're going to see yet another uptick in observations reports, because a lot of people will still continue to observe what's convenient. At the same time, I agree that it would be better for us to establish and communicate a set of priorities as you're talking about. So I expect we should anticipate both will happen. We will benefit by being better planners, but at the same time, we need to be prepared for a large influx of observations from people who will now have the ability to observe much more often from fixed locations or from their home in general.
I think that each observer will also have his own priorities despite the priorities of the organization. And so, you know, this is going to be something that requires substantial discussion and planning, I think.
Well, also people with fixed sites might want to use something similar to the automated system that we were shown earlier, and just set it up to observe all the asteroids that come across their scope. But if it's a fixed site, they can't move it. So that's somewhat out of the discussion.
Well, not really. I mean, we can still encourage them to prioritize events that are coordinating with others, even from fixed locations. So we would still want to identify priorities even from that perspective. But you're right. Well, we will see a lot of we'll see a lot of reports. John's going to be busy.
Right.
As well, Steve and Eric and other coordinators.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
I have a comment to make about the Zoom session. I want to say that, you know, I've been coming to IOTA meetings pretty faithfully since, at least the last 10 years, and probably, you know, off and on before that for another 15. And I believe the first meeting I ever went to, there were 7 people in attendance. We have had our meetings both in person and online. We've typically had in the low 20s if you count everybody who comes to the meetings and sits together in a classroom. We've had probably in the low 20s, and some of them would come and go a bit. And then a few online, so we'd get 10 or 15 online. I think the high 30s is the most we've ever had at a meeting, counting the classroom attendees and those online together. I want to tell you from my just sort of informal monitoring of the attendees at this meeting, the peak this morning was 69 attendees, and the peak this afternoon was 78 attendees, and they're from all over the world, okay? I mean, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and North America, and some from Asia, you know. So this has been a really we've taken a step with this meeting toward, I think, better dissemination of our discussions and better getting to know the worldwide observers and techniques that we use. So I really think this Zoom session today has been terrific in that regard. Very successful. Also, I just wanted to mention, you know, we need to close, and I mean, I don't mind if people want to sit and talk, but I need to sort of make an official closing to the meeting. And so I want to do that and just say, what do they say in that TV show? See y'all back tomorrow in this locality to have a heap and helping of our hospitality. And we start at UT 14 hours. That's Central Daylight Time, 9 a.m. tomorrow. We're pretending we're in Texas. That's 10 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Mountain and 7 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. It's 12 a.m. Australian time. I don't imagine many Aussies will be with us tomorrow morning. But anyway, just pay attention to the schedule. We kept to the schedule pretty well today. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks. Just a quick reminder that there's a separate Zoom link for tomorrow's meeting. So please look at your emails or online on the occultations.org website or in the emails that were sent out to the various groups.io groups. So you'll get tomorrow's link.